Welcome to the Vine Resources Podcast Show with your host, David Lawrence.
Welcome to another edition of today's Vine Resources Podcast Show. Well, today I've got a great guest for us to speak with us live from London. His name's Yorick Naeff. Yorick is the co-CEO of BUX. BUX is a really exciting financial app in the trading market. I'm going to let him tell you more about that. Yorick, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Nice for having me.
Well, I'd love to talk more about the business, Yorick. So why don't we just launch straight into that? Tell us more about BUX. What is it?
So BUX, effectively, you touched it. You basically mentioned it already. It's a trading app, but I think we are a little bit more than that. We actually have two trading apps, just to be exact. We launched our first app in 2014, which is indeed a real speculative trading app, really focused on the younger generation, making investing on the short term more accessible, more intuitive, more simple. Great success. Rolled it out to 9 countries in Europe. Grew the business extensively with offices in Amsterdam and London. And then in 2017, roughly, we saw some regulatory changes coming up. And we thought, also we saw the success of Robinhood, of course, across the ocean. And we said, this is actually the perfect time to start also looking into offering zero commission investing in Europe. Before that time, it was always very difficult to offer that, and I can get into the nitty-gritty details later, but let's just say that we started building a full-fledged brokerage platform, and we launched the second app called BUX Zero in September 2019 in the Netherlands first. And that's now going off like a rocket, right? We already released the app in Germany, Austria, Belgium, and France as well. And yes, so far great success.
Fantastic.
And that app is more focused on mid to long term investing, real investing in cash equity, so real shares and ETFs.
Fantastic. And look, tell us a bit more about that early stage of the business. And I know obviously you've got a banking background as well. I think many people don't understand the complexity of the compliance, perhaps fighting against the incumbents and probably those relationships you had to build within the regulators. Can you just share a bit of an insight, apart from the technology, which we'll come on to in a minute, but what was those early challenges like, and how was it like beating down those doors to get your name heard above the noise?
Yeah, you have to have a lot of patience, to be honest.
Yeah.
But of course, I've got a banking background myself, indeed, so I know how it is to work in a regulated environment. And you know what the biggest challenge is, to find a great mix between talent that is really good in building something, that a great technology business and really wants to move forward and accelerate, and people that understand how to actually operate a professional business and formalize everything and make sure you adhere to all the compliance and regulatory requirements. Now, and finding that mix is, of course, especially in the beginning, is the biggest challenge, because in the beginning, everybody wants to run, right? Everybody just wants to, let's move forward, let's get this done real quickly. And people have the tendency to cut corners here and there. And that's something that you cannot allow, especially not in the beginning, because you got a lot of eyeballs on you. And therefore, you really need to make sure that you adhere to all the requirements and stuff like that. And really have also, from a governance perspective, have an organization that can, where you can convince the regulator that what you're doing is actually good for your customers, as well as, everything is being in control. All the systems and controls are in place. So juggling that is, in the beginning, of course, very difficult, especially because you're very short-handed. So you need people that can pick up multiple responsibilities at the same time. But once you get the ball rolling and you have that team, then it's actually smooth sailing, because at that moment, once you have everything formalized, you've got everything administratively in order, then it's really focused on growing the business and building a really cool product.
What was the most significant challenges you had to overcome in that first 6 to 12 months, and particularly also coming up to the initial launch, that getting those first live customers onto the app?
Yeah, the biggest challenge is always find good talent, right? It's very difficult because your budget is very restricted. So you need to find talent, and the problem with good talent is they often don't come easy, and they're not cheap. And especially if your budget is really limited, then it's really difficult to get them on board. But so at the end, you have to find a creative solution to make sure that they come on board. Once you have them on board, the biggest challenge, of course, is to get the attention that you need to get out there, make sure that people are aware that your product exists. Create certain deals with certain media outlets, for example, to make sure that you got at least some coverage for a very decent price. And luckily, there is, especially in London and in Amsterdam, there's a good ecosystem around startups. So there's a lot of people that try to help each other to get things done. And that helped us tremendously. But I can imagine if that wasn't there, it would have been really, really difficult to get something done.
Have you found that the approach with the European and the Dutch regulators, for example, the compliance, has been quite similar to the UK, or is there some nuances between those relationships?
Well, I mean, every regulator is different. We now have a license with the FCA and with the AFM, the Dutch regulator. I would say that, I mean, both are very professional, to be honest. If there's one key difference, I would say, then the FCA is really rule-based. They have a rule book, and it's a huge amount of information that you need to go through to really understand exactly what needs to happen and to what you need to adhere to and everything. So they're really rule-based. As long as you adhere to the rules, it's more black and white. The AFM is a little bit more principle-based, I would say. They also have, for example, product governance requirements that are really important. You really need to make sure that the product that you offer is a good fit for the customers that you offer it to, and that your target market fits with your distribution strategy. They think that is really, really important. But apart from that, I mean, being a regulated company is just, adhere to the rules. And the rules are, to a large extent, are European-wide. We've got the ESMA, that's the overarching government body, effectively overseeing all the national competent authorities. And they set up most of the rules. You have MiFID, which is the regulatory requirements for offering investment products in the European landscape. So the rules are quite, they're written down, they're pretty black and white, so you just need to adhere to these rules. Some items are, of course, up for interpretation. So there is a little bit of discussion that you can have with the regulators about that. But I think both regulators are very, very professional, and they know exactly what they're talking about. They're knowledgeable. So in the end, you just need to make sure that you have the proper knowledge and experience on board, and that you have the necessary, systems and controls in place, and then you're good to go.
What are your customers feeding back to you that they want that they're not getting from other providers?
Well, I mean, the most important thing, of course, is we don't have a lot of legacy, right? And and that's why I mentioned the simplicity and the intuitiveness that we bring in our platform. I think that is the most important thing that we bring. If you look at traditional brokerage firms, they're all built either in the before the web age, or they've built in the web age. Yeah. Nowadays, I mean, I don't know how many hours you spend per day on average on your mobile phone, but especially that new generation, the Instagram generation, the millennials, they are very used to just using their mobile phone on a daily basis. Yep. So what happens is that they also expect a certain experience on the mobile phone when it comes to investments and to trading. Yep. Now, making that translation from a web-based platform to a mobile application is very, very difficult, because you can't translate a web page where you have so much information that you can display to a mobile app, basically, which is very restricted in the space that you have. So you need to come up with an approach that's completely different. And that's why we are, of course, very lucky that we could start from scratch, because in the end we can build a native application that is really fit for a mobile experience. And and by doing that and keeping things very simple, intuitive, that's really what separates us. Next to that, I think you just need to make sure that everything works properly, right? We can use the newest technology that's out there, that's overall a lot more stable and secure than the older technologies on which older platforms have been built. So from that perspective, our uptime has been great. Also in the whole COVID situation, of course, we've never experienced a significant downtime. So overall, that is what separates us, I think, when you compare us to the traditional brokerage firms.
I'm glad you mentioned that as well about downtime. And obviously, there's, in the news, obviously, over the last several months with Robinhood having outage for various reasons on things. What are the learnings that you, as a business, as a company, take from those kind of issues? And perhaps how can the wider community and the wider industry learn from that?
Yeah, it's a good question because we were basically lucky. We decided in 2017 to build a platform that is completely owned by us. So the whole value chain, effectively, we built it from scratch. I think we're one of the first brokerage firms in, at least in continental Europe, in the past 10 years that built a whole brokerage firm effectively, or a whole brokerage platform from scratch. And the nice thing about not being dependent on any third parties and not be dependent on any other technology is that we keep everything in house. So
Good.
basically, everything that you do in terms of technology is completely fit and made, tailored towards what you need to deliver to your customers. And if you are using third-party software, just a simple example, for example, is that if I use a third-party technology that's being used by multiple platforms because it's an off-the-shelf solution, for example, what happens is that if volatility kicks in and the markets are going like crazy, which happened, for example, in March, then of course it's going to be very difficult for all these platforms to maintain because they're all built on top of this off-the-shelf solution. Now we have a platform that's only built for us because we build it ourselves. So effectively, I think in the end, what you need to make sure of, and that's the key learning that I would at least want to broadcast to the larger environment, is that if you really want to differentiate yourself in terms of uptime and really want to make sure that you have a decent performance, make sure that the critical parts of the value chain are owned by yourself. Especially because in the end, you want to make sure that you deliver a good value to your customers, and uptime, especially when you're dealing with real money, it needs to be good.
Fantastic. Thanks for that insight there. Yeah, Yorick, you obviously, you're growing very quickly. You're 120 employees in the business, not 90 odd in Amsterdam, 30 in London, and others in Germany. What tell us a little bit about now, and you're obviously in London at the moment. Tell us what your day-to-day looks like. What's it like running the business at the moment? What are you getting up to?
Yeah, it's an exciting time now, of course. It's difficult to answer that question because in the end, every day is completely different. So if I have to, explain what a typical day in the office looks like, I couldn't tell you because every day there are new surprises waiting for me. But let's at least touch base on the biggest components that I'm busy with. First of all, of course, we're accelerating the business, right? So there are two aspects to that. First and foremost, of course, the rolling out to different countries, making sure that we, tailor make the product to what is required in that specific country, because we want to really offer a local experience. That's the first thing. Second thing I'm working with is really making sure that the execution of new features, new improvements to the app are being executed really, really fast. So we really built an execution machine, so to say, to really make sure that we can deliver new features and improved, supportive tools in the app really, really quickly. And we're just busy with that. What's the prioritization? How does that look? Next to that, of course, we have quite some other stakeholders that we need to keep warm. We have a few third parties that we work with, so I need to make sure that these relationships are intact. And of course, the last but not least, and that's I think one of the most important things. I always try to spend a little bit of time, spending with the customer support people, looking at our customers, what kind of feedback comes in, are there any learnings that we can take from that, what are they requesting, because of course I need to translate that to the product as well, and basically saying, okay, look, we're now currently seeing, for example, that the charting is very basic in our new app. And people are really demanding or asking at least for some more sophisticated statistics. And this is feedback that we hear a lot. So of course, we're trying to use that feedback and see with the product domain, okay, how can we make that work? How can we improve that in the short term? So these are typical things that I'm busy with on a day-to-day basis. And on top of that, of course, there's some incidental things always that come up. But that's basically the picture that I can paint for you guys.
Fantastic. Well, super busy at the moment. So what's it? So tell us. We talked before we started this conversation today a little bit about the office and the impacts. Tell us about the last 6 months for you, particularly 9 months. It's almost 9 months now, something like that. How has COVID impacted you? How has the changes in the work environment and what have you seen? And what do you see as both the challenges you've had, but also the opportunities moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we have benefited a lot, of course, from what has happened. First and foremost, of course, there is a huge interest in the retail investment space. So A lot of people started to invest. I mean, that we already saw that happening, obviously, because that's why we started the business in the first place.
Yeah.
But especially now with the low interest rates, right, and of course house prices that skyrocketed, it's just very difficult for people to get a decent return on their savings and to really create a well sophisticated pension plan. So we really saw that change was happening. And I think that the whole COVID situation just accelerated things. People looked more towards retail investment products. So our business has accelerated tremendously through that. That being said, of course, at the same time, we also needed to juggle the different requirements that basically were coming forward from this big change, right? Because people couldn't just work in the office anymore. So everybody had to work remotely. We need to make sure that people they have sophisticated and tooling and systems to make sure that they can do their job properly. So the beginning was quite stressful, just to make sure that everyone has a well set up home office, so to say, where they can do their job properly. Everybody has laptops; they can connect to the office network when they can. But I think that was done in about 1 to 2 weeks. Because we're already operating fully in the cloud, and we can already work remotely because all the systems that we use are also all operating in the cloud as well. So not just the app that is running in a cloud environment, but also our underlying systems. So that shift was made quite quickly. Then, of course, the last 9 months, so to say, all people worked from home. Now we're slowly getting people back into the office. We have now 25% coverage ratio effectively from people that work from the offices again, simply because also they want to work from the offices because they want to see each other again. So we have a schedule, we rotate to make sure that everybody can still come to the office, but that everybody can still keep their distance and everybody can be safe. But I think it's here to stay. It's been quite a shift, but I mentioned it before to a lot of people. I'm just really surprised by how fast people can adapt to this new environment, and I think it's here to stay.
It's going to be interesting, and I think obviously during that initial period, that March and April time, it was quite difficult for many people, especially people I talk to on the phone all the time. But how did you, and how has it changed you as well? But how have you kept that motivation? How have you kept that communication up to the people who were at home at that time? But also, how has it changed your communication going forward, or has it?
It did change a lot, to be honest, because in the end, because people are not in the offices anymore. I always feel like if you're not in the office, you don't see each other anymore on a day-to-day basis, the engagement is impacted automatically. I notice it with myself as well. If I don't see my colleagues on a day-to-day basis, then it feels like sort of a distance that has been created. So what we really did is we over communicated. So we really created instances and periodical feedback sessions and everything to make sure that everyone is aware of what's happening, what developments we're seeing, all these kind of things. So we scheduled all hands meetings every week, for example, where everybody can dial in and we explain what has happened in the past week. We have update sessions that we are creating with basically subgroups within the different domains of the company, really trying to over communicate and just keep in touch with each other. Sometimes it did feel like we were having too many calls, basically, because we were talking to each other so often. But it was also basically a requirement, because in the end, you want to make sure that engagement is still up there. And I get a lot of positive feedback just from the fact that we have, for example, a very simple tip that I can give to every business lead is, schedule Q&A sessions with your people. We set up a small survey every week. And where people can submit their questions that they have about what's happening with the company and what progress are we making, what product features are we developing, what feedback do we see from our customers, all kinds of questions that they can ask. And then we have an all hands session every week where we go through these questions and publicly, effectively, answer all these questions. And these are very, very helpful. And I got a lot of positive feedback from that, because people then can not only ask their questions, but they get feedback and they can understand also what's happening in the different domains of the business. I
think that's a great idea. And it's great to obviously keep that engagement up and let people share their feelings as well. What in terms of in terms of, growing a company is hard work, right? A lot of late nights, a lot of weekend work, probably quite stressful at times, and I'm sure many other things. I'm just curious, how has your work ethic been developed? Is there anything from your earlier life or your childhood that's influenced your work ethic?
That's an interesting question indeed. Now, I mean, it's of course there are two things that are important to mention here. First and foremost, of course, it's a work ethic, right? It's a mentality, and I mean, I've grown up in a single parent family. My mother was alone, 3 kids that she had to raise by herself, and full. From that perspective, I've got a great example that shows how to go the extra mile and really work hard to make ends meet effectively. In the end, I think that is a starting point for me, but I think it's also a character issue, to be honest. Some people like their job. Like if you don't like your job, then of course I can imagine that people are you can't work 80 hours a week. It's just not possible because it would just burn you out. But if you like your job, you get energy from it, then it's a completely different story, right? And I think that I'm from that perspective, I'm blessed. I'm really lucky that I have chosen an industry that also fits me very well and that I really like to work in. So I love my job. I go to work every day with a smile on my face, and I'm having that already for years. I'm balancing it out, of course, as well with some other things. Like I've got hobbies as well that I always try to pay attention to. But as long as you can do your side activities, you have a healthy social life, you have a good personal, environment, then, it's not a problem to work 80 hours a week, as long as you do what you love.
Well, look, just as a bit of a sideline, obviously, as you're in London, a bit of a cheeky question. What are the nuances you see working with the Brits as opposed to the Dutch? I know we're quite aligned, but what's the things that you notice?
I mean, it's not. I mean, in the end, the work ethic is there, and the mentality is there. So I think I've got a good relationship with the Brits always had. So it's for me, the shift has not been that big. If there's one key difference, I would say is that the Dutch are very direct and very blunt sometimes, and the Brits are more reserved, so to say. So sometimes you have to understand exactly what it is they're trying to say. At the beginning, I was struggling with that a little bit myself, being Dutch. But I mean, that is something that you get used to quite quickly, I would say. And as long as you understand, where the reservations sometimes come from or why they're not really direct, I think it's perfectly fine. I also believe that the bluntness and the directness of Dutch people is sometimes also can be, you can also see it as something that's basically rude sometimes. So I like actually the approach of the British people, and therefore I love to live in London. I love to work in London. Love to deal with the British people. I think they're really, in terms of work ethic, hard workers. They have the right mindset, want to get things done. The work-life balance is a little bit less in London in comparison to Amsterdam. The Dutch are, from that perspective, a little bit more like, I'm happy to work hard, but I also need to take my time off every now and then. From that perspective, the British environment fits me a little bit better.
Tell us about. Thanks for sharing that. Tell us about your best advice for anyone who's going through tremendous business change. What would you share with them?
Well, I think the most important thing is to make sure that you take everybody's opinion and feelings and stuff like that into account. I mean, what I noticed a lot, and I've been talking to a lot of business owners as well in the past few months, is that there is effectively two different types of approaches. One is, this is a harsh time. You need to do what I say. This is the only way to get things done, and you not just need to be harsh in your approach. And the other is, let's work together as a team. Let's see what we can do to make things met for everybody, make sure that everybody's on the same page together. And maybe it does require a little bit more effort, because in the end, you need to make sure that everyone is on the same page and how you approach it. But I do believe that the latter scenario is better in the longer term. So I think that if you want to make changes in challenging times, and this is in general the case, it's not just for the whole COVID-19 situation, but I think in general that you need to make sure that you have a team around you that supports you, that you take their opinions and their feelings into account, And in the end, as a team, you have to make that change. You should never do it just because you think you need that change. You have a perfect, what you believe a perfect idea on how to make the different changes. That's not going to work anymore. I think especially if people work from different locations remotely and it's more flexible, then you need to make sure that everyone is on the same page. So my advice is to really, communicate with the people in your teams, with the people inside your organization. Make sure that they're on board and that their ideas are taken into account to really make the different changes. And you'll see, that's at least my experience, that once everybody's on the same page, they also support that change, and therefore the change is going so much more smooth and so much more easy than it would ever be without having them on board and without over communicating.
Now it's a really interesting time in your business, in your market, the industry. I mean, there's huge growth. What's really exciting you, and where do you see the next 12 to 18 months going in terms of the industry? And what's your crystal ball telling you?
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at the overall industry, I mean, we're coming from the fintech background, right? If you look at the fintech, I think fintech is accelerating. Of course, there are some struggles here and there, and which I can completely imagine, especially with these challenging times. But overall, I think that the tech side is here to stay. We are dealing with digitalization of the entire industry, so I think the future is in the tech companies for sure. And when it really comes to the fintech industry, there are a few sub-industries, so to say, sub-domains, where I think it is going to be really, really interesting. I think so by default, the lending business is going to be very interesting, especially looking at the interest rates and, of course, the fact that the economy is going to be challenging in the next couple of, probably years even. So that's the first thing. Second is, of course, the whole investment space. I do believe that there's a lot of interesting stuff happening. The investment space is of course huge nowadays, because you're not just talking about the financial markets. You're not just talking about, investing in cash equity, ETFs or structured products, but you also have cryptocurrencies nowadays, for example, that are accelerating. So I think the whole investment space is going to show a significant shift. I think especially for retail clients, I think the investment space has become more attractive, more interesting, and also the returns are quite interesting if you compare it to your savings account. I do wonder though, to what extent the high prices that we're currently seeing are sustainable, especially if you look at the economic situation now and the situation around the whole COVID situation. I'm just surprised that it feels a little bit artificial to me. Because of the Fed in the US, just printing money. I'm really curious about the US elections on the 3rd of November, what that will result in. I think there's a lot of changes that we can see in the upcoming future, and I think that especially the fintech space will definitely will be on top of that change, and will either benefit or will be hurt by that change. And what the outcome is going to be, I don't know yet, because it's all dependent on what's going to happen in the economy.
For sure. What kind of people are you interested in connecting to, building relationships with? Who are you interested in connecting with?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, there are two types of people that I really would like to connect with. Of course, I always want to connect with business owners, entrepreneurs. If people have great ideas, I'd love to connect with them, because I think, how I always see it is that the magic happens outside the comfort zone, and entrepreneurs are the typical example of people that are willing to operate outside their comfort zone, because there's always something new to explore, always something new to discover. And I would really love to connect with people that are operating outside their comfort zone, coming up with new ideas, having new startups and or scale ups. And if there's anything that we can learn from them, then that will be super helpful. And if I can help them in any way, based on my experience, of course, then I'm happy to connect with them as well. So that's the first thing. Second group of people, so I said, that I would like to connect with are just people that are interested in the fintech space in general, right? People that actually, invest, for example, quite extensively, understand the industry very, very well. especially for the retail investment space, of course, because that's the space where I'm operating in. I would love to connect with anybody that either has an affinity with the retail investment space or is connected somehow through their business with the retail investment space. And that's, of course, because that will add significant value to us. And it's always good to look outside and see if there's anything that we can learn, because I mean technology is not something static, right? It's always developing, it's changing, and we also need to stay on top of our game. And the only way to do that is by stay connected to people that are actually making these different changes, are involved in the business in making these changes.
What as a final thought for you, Yorick, if you were giving your 20-year-old self one piece of advice now looking back, what would you say?
Well, I mean, I've had quite a roller coaster between now and then, but the key learning that I've had, and it's maybe a little bit of an open door. I don't know, but people can judge that for themselves. But I think the most important thing is I've had quite some instances that I was just focused on, getting my career up to speed and really focused on, okay, what will bring my character forward in the best way possible for the future plans that I have. And I didn't look so much at what is, doing something that I really like to do. And I think that in the end, there is a synergy to be gained from the fact that people that actually do something that they like, they're normally also good at it. And because they're good at it, they also are accelerating in it a lot. And that's the key learning that I had. I was, of course, a banker myself for years, working in retail and investment banking. And I was on a very young age. I made quite a lot of money already. And in the end, it didn't make me happy at all. It just didn't, at a certain point, I didn't go to work with a smile on my face. I mean, it was just, draining at some point. And then I got this opportunity. Basically, I was approached by somebody to help build up this company and found a complete new startup effectively. And I thought, you know what? I don't have a large mortgage. I don't have any kids. I was, I think back then I was like 29, 30 years old. And I thought, you know what? If I want to do something like this, then I should do it now. Effectively, you're throwing away your salary because you earn nothing pretty much at the beginning, and you just take a leap of faith. And it's the best thing that ever, the best decision that I've ever made, because in the end, you have to have faith in yourself. And I would always regret, like now we're relatively successful, but I mean, even if we were not successful, I would never regret making that step. Because in the end, you would always, in a later stage, if I'm now thinking even 20 years further from now, I would think back and think like, yeah, what if I would have done it, and what kind of success would it and learnings would it give me, and the fact that I did it, I'm really proud of myself. Let's be honest about that as well. But it's the key learning that I also want to share with other people is, I mean, in the end, don't be scared to sometimes take a step back and do something that you like. If you believe in yourself, you'll get there anyway.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you mentioned about the sacrifices and the financial sacrifices and many other sacrifices that you had. If someone was listening to this and thinking, God, how am I going to quit my job and start something up and maybe not be able to eat properly for months on end until I can afford to pay myself, or maybe even years. What advice would you give them about going about starting that off?
Well, I think the first thing you need to do is you shouldn't take that leap of faith blindly, right? I mean, if you're just going to say I'm going to quit my job and we'll see what happens, then I would not advise you to do that. But I would advise you to, at least if you have a kind of an entrepreneurial spirit and you want to maybe at a certain point, create your own startup. Talk to people that have that experience, that have done that before, so they can explain you what kind of pitfalls you need to take into account and how to set things up. I mean, I'm happy to share that as well if people want to connect. And then, at a certain point, talk to people to create a small team. You shouldn't do this completely by yourself, unless, of course, there are a lot of entrepreneurs that are super wealthy that have the luxury to start up things by themselves. But normally, I would always advise you to do it with a team, because a team you can support each other. There are also often other team members that know other people in the industry or other people that could help you in maybe funding, for example. Make sure you have at least a decent basis before you actually start. And I had a really good friend of mine I used to work with as a banker as well, and he started his own company as well. And actually, he was already busy with setting everything up for about 2 years while he was still working a full-time job as a banker before he actually took the leap of faith to quit and fully focus on that business that he was doing on the side. And that business became a huge success. I mean, it's an international business now, and I think valuation is over 100 million already. So I think that, I mean, in the end, he made a choice, but that choice came already from 2 years of preparatory work. It wasn't just something that he did out of the blue. So make sure that you do all the necessary preparations and you are in a decent state to really actually quit your job to do it. Same thing for me. We had a team effectively the moment that I quit, and there was already a little bit of funding. So in the end, it was a decent starting point. I would never recommend to just quit blindly and hope for the best. That is just not, that's utopia.
Yorick, thank you for joining us. Thanks for sharing so much. If people want to connect with you, reach out to you, find out more about BUX and connect with yourself, what's the best way they can do that?
Email me or LinkedIn. I mean, that both are fine. My email address is my first and last name separated by a full stop at getbux.com. So easy to share. On LinkedIn, you can also find me. Send me a message. Don't be shy, and we'll connect.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining me. Good luck.
All right. Great, David. Thank you for having me.
We really hope you enjoyed the podcast today. If you want to listen to more exclusive tips and life lessons from our guest, go to the resources page at vineresources.com.